this comes from Helen, and I believe that Helen is in the chat room. I could be wrong, but I think so. She says a comparison. Acts 8 with the belief and baptism of a eunuch and becoming part of God's chosen, and how in Deuteronomy 23:1 a eunuch will not enter into the assembly/congregation of the Lord. I'm trying to understand what has changed. Why is a eunuch allowed after the Messiah rose? Now, so the first thing that I thought was, okay, the assembly can mean the temple, like the temple complex. Is a eunuch not allowed in the temple complex? But that's not true. The Gentiles, even Gentiles were allowed in the temple complex. And so as I often do, I went to the wiser of the Hags and asked my dad, what do you think's going on in Acts 8 if a eunuch is not allowed in the assembly? And my dad said something very, very, very interesting. He said, I am convinced that most of the time, 85-90% of the time, when the word assembly is used in the Tanakh, it is talking about the authority. The 70 elders are, that we just looked at, the 70 elders, they're called the assembly of Israel. And so I thought that was really interesting, and I started doing a word study. I dropped everything and started doing, this is the word study I did yesterday, was I looked up the word assembly in the Hebrew and went through and started looking at all the different times. Now, I'll give you a good example. I believe it's in Exodus 12:6. What's happening? The people are supposed to bring the Passover lamb, and it's supposed to be slaughtered, right? And it says the entire assembly of Israel will slaughter it at twilight. But who's it talking about? It's not talking about all of the people in Israel. It's not saying that man, woman, and child is going to slaughter the Passover lamb. Who slaughters the Passover lamb? The priests, those who are in authority of the temple. They're called the assembly of Israel in Exodus 12:6. And so if you look through the Tanakh, I think my dad's got a very good point here. I think that, and I think in this passage as well, and Rob, I'll kick this over to you because I think you have some good thoughts on idolatry as well. And my father brought that up as well. But the idea that a eunuch is not allowed in the assembly means that he's not allowed to become a leader figure in Israel and be a part of the leadership of the assembly. And the reason why I think goes back to why eunuchs were eunuchs in the ancient Near East, and that it was tied to idolatry. Go.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. Is that there, and one commentary that I think does a good job on this is Jeffrey Tigay's JPS Torah commentary on Deuteronomy. But he goes in and he talks about how in ancient Near Eastern type of religious worlds, cultic worship and sacrifice, there were times where certain state officials had to actually castrate themselves or do some sort of emasculation as a ritual in order to qualify.
Right.
In other words, this was a rite of passage in other kind of cultic, idolatrous worlds. So the very command, and we see this with a lot of commands that God gives, are diametrically opposed to what is being practiced in other places, because this is different. This is not like that, and we're not going to let anybody outsider even think that that we're like these others. That's one aspect. So in other words, it doesn't mean that necessarily that this is a person who was just damaged by just by the fact of their birth or whatever, but could include someone who thought that they deliberately needed to do this, like in other nations. But also, it has to do with in terms of priesthood and leadership, like you're pointing out. We also want to keep in mind the same exact things. If you look through Deuteronomy, and Leviticus, the same things that disqualify an animal from being acceptable on the altar are the
Right.
things that disqualify a priest from serving as a priest. And this emasculation is one such quote defect or mark against it being acceptable.
And
so
this ties.
so that has to do with leadership. So God, in other words, God says, "Offer me a tamim, an animal that is tam, or that is unblemished, or it's unblemished and it hasn't damaged. If you're going to offer an animal, it can't be an animal that damaged another animal or something, right? It's got to be what they say, tam or tamim."
Don't miss any clips from Messiah Matters by clicking the subscribe button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and share it so other people can see it too.